Hello, I'm not Chuck. In this video, I'm going to replace a defective socket in the driver's side tail light on my StarCraft travel trailer. And in the process, I'll be making some wiring repairs using butt splices, tap splices, heat shrink tubing, maybe some other things. I'll also be using some tools, a number 2 square driver bit, wire cutters, wire strippers, wire crimpers, slip joint pliers, and a nitrile glove. The outside lens is held on just by a couple of clips. A little screwdriver helps to release those clips, but sometimes it'll just pop off if you wiggle it a little bit. Now there's the socket we're going to change out. I have already tested the socket, inspected the socket, and I know that the socket has a defect. I do have a brand new bulb in the socket. That's part of the testing process that I went through. And the first thing I need to do is remove that bulb. And in order to remove the bulb, I'm going to put a glove on my hand so that I don't touch the bulb. Now the reason for that is that my hand and your hand and everybody's hand has oils on the skin, and that oil, when you remove the bulb, the oil is transferred to the outside surface of the glass, and then when the glass gets hot, that oil vaporizes and causes the bulb to crack, which of course causes the filaments to burn out. So we're being careful with the bulb. That bulb cost at my local auto supply store cost about $3 and almost $4 by the time you consider tax. So I want to be careful with that. To remove the housing, I need a number 2 square bit. That's because the screws, many of the screws on this travel trailer and probably on your RV are considered combination screw heads. It's a combination of a square bit and a Phillips bit. Save the screws. It says right here, use only lamp type T3157, which is what I had in there and which I'm going to put back. Now while I was testing this, I actually took this apart, and I see on the back it gives me a legend for the socket, and it says the ground wire is white, the tail light wire is black, the turn signal brake wire is green, and it refers to these 3 wires that come out of the socket. Now when I pull the wires from the trailer out, I see not only a mess, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, but I see that the wires from the trailer are not the same color as the wires that go to the socket. For example, this is the black wire going to the socket. It's a green wire coming from the trailer. This is the green wire going to the socket, and it's a red wire coming from the trailer. In fact, the only one that matches up is the white, which is the ground wire. I actually made myself a little cheat sheet right here. Maybe you can see it. The trailer side and the socket side. The trailer side, the green wire goes to the black, the white wire goes to the white wire, and the red wire goes to the green wire. So once I cut these wires loose, I'll have a record of how they're supposed to be connected back together. Now let me show you something about the wiring. First of all, this is ridiculous. This is just absolutely ridiculous that whoever wired this up, and I don't know whether it was wired at the factory this way or whether the previous owner, I'm not the first owner of this, it was a one-owner trailer when I bought it. I don't know whether the previous owner did this mess or whether it was done this way at the factory, but either way, it's completely and totally ridiculous. You can see that they have taken the ground wire, which is in a loop, and they have tapped into it here, and then they've tapped into that wire here, and then they've connected it back together here and here. Makes no sense whatsoever. So I'm going to replace all that mess. Oh, and by the way, you can see that the wire has been nicked here by these what are sometimes called Scotch lock connectors. So obviously the connectors have been put on more than once. There's another place where the insulation is broken, and not only is it broken and should have been taped back up, it's just a mess. Now the ground wire is not that big a deal because ground is ground and the trailer frame is grounded. So if one of these white wires were to touch the frame, touch ground, it wouldn't matter because it's already grounded. But if either of the red or the green wires touch the frame, then you would have a short of power to ground, assuming that either the running lights or the brake lights were supposed to be on. So it's kind of a mess. Oh, and what's under this tape, I don't know. I didn't take that off, but I will, and you can see what's under there. Okay, well, there's where somebody has nicked the wire and actually gone to the trouble of taping it back up. So that's a good thing. Over here looks like the same thing, except their tape slipped and the bare wire is exposed there again. So we're going to try to fix all that. So the next step is to take these Scotch locks off. Here they are. So on this side, flip that up and open the connector up. And the wires come loose. So here's one off and out of the way. Now we'll do that again. Pull the locking tab up and don't push it back down. And open the connector up. And the wires will come out. So now there's my ground wire from the trailer. Here's the other end of that ground wire. Now, the way that was supposed to be made was, and probably was at some point, is this is a loop. This ground wire comes out, it's supposed to go to the socket and then continue on to other places, probably to the socket on the other side of the trailer. So it's supposed to be, these two wires are supposed to be connected together, and probably were at some point. So I'm going to try to connect them back together and do so in a manner that's not going to leave bare wires exposed. So we're going to cut that loose. I'm going to go ahead and just cut this one off and cut this one off. And I'm cutting these at the place where the insulation has already been broken, so I'll have as much slack as possible to work with. That process gets rid of all of the accidentally exposed wires except that spot. And I'm leaving that one because I need the slack. I don't want to not have enough slack to make my connections. So I'm going to go and get some connectors to put this back together, and I'll be back and show you what I come up with. Alright, here's what I've come up with. The integrity of this wire, even though it's had that Scotch lock connector on it, the integrity of the wire itself is not hurt. So I'm going to take a piece of heat shrink tubing and slide it down to where it covers and reinforces that spot. It's actually a pretty good fit like that, but then I'm going to shrink that tubing around that wire by using an ordinary candle lighter, which works about like they all do. And all I have to do is apply a little bit of heat and have a good tight insulation again on the white wire. I could have just cut it off, but I need every inch of wire that I can get on that white. So I'm going to snip off this bare end just to get rid of it. This is 16 gauge wire, by the way, 16 AWG, so I'm going to strip about, what is that, a quarter of an inch or so off that end. I don't want that one to disappear back down the rabbit hole, so I'm going to pull it out again. I'm going to use what's called a butt splice. Alright, these are butt splices, and you can see I'm not just using vulgar language, that's the official name of it. Butt splices. They're made in 3 sizes, or this pack has 3 sizes in it. The smallest size is red, that's made for 22 gauge through 16 gauge wire. The blues are for 16 through 14, and the yellows are for 12 through 10. I'm going to try a red one. That's for 22 through 16. I'm going to slightly twist the loose ends of the wire together so as to make as small a bundle as possible. And I'm going to see if that'll go on there, and it does go on just fine. Now, I have a good set of crimpers here, which is really important. If you buy a cheap set of crimpers, they will not perform as well as they should. So, you see this part of the crimper is for 16 gauge through 10 gauge wire. So that's the part I'm going to use. I'm going to come down and make sure that I catch the wire, and I did. So that takes care of that. I'm going to take a piece of the wire that someone else has abused. I'm going to cut it there and there so as to get rid of those 2 damaged spots to the insulation. Now I have a short but usable piece of wire, the original wire that was in the trailer, and I'm going to splice that together and create a loop. Again, I'm using the strip section for 16 gauge wire. Works really well, doesn't damage the wire. I actually got it a little bit long. I'm going to go ahead and strip the other end of the wire. Twist the ends up into that end up into a fairly small package. I'm going to trim this one just a little bit. I really got it too long, so I'm going to cut off that much. Twist it up fairly tightly. Slip it inside my butt splice connector. Make sure it's up in there all the way. And then I'm going to crimp it just like I did the other side. Make sure it's up in there really good. And now I have a good electrical mechanical connection there. I'm going to repeat the process over here. Now I've restored that to the way it originally was, or should have been. I don't know whether it was or not. The way it should have been in the trailer, which is just a loop that carries the ground from here out to here, where we're going to make a connection to it, back into the trailer, and probably to the tail light on the opposite side of the trailer. So we're ready. The white wire is ready to be spliced onto. Now, as you can see, we're a little short there on red. I wish it was a little longer, but the connector that I'm going to be putting in actually has fairly long leads on it. Here's my new connector. So you can see that the leads are fairly long. Again, it would have been nice if I'd had a longer red wire, but that's what I have to work with. I could splice a piece on, but then I'd just have another splice, which I don't really need. So I'm going to use the end of this. I'm going to splice it onto the proper wire on this connector. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the green wire, and then I'm going to use a new tap splice to connect the white to the white. Snip off the end of that wire to clean it up a little bit. Use my 16 gauge stripper to get about 1/4 of an inch. It might be a little bit short. Get just a little more. I don't know whether that's 1/4 or 3/8, but anyway, looks like it'll reach. Another red butt splice connector. Thread that on. I say thread it on, I just really mean turn it so that the wire slides up in there nicely. Make sure it's seated properly. And crimp it. Good connection. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and prep the green wire. Since the red one is the shortest, I'm going to cut some of this extra green off. Doesn't serve any purpose because it's furthest I can get the socket from the trailer anyway is determined by the length of the red wire. So I'm going to cut this off. Strip it with my 16 gauge spot. And I got that one just like I wanted, not too long and not too short. So, one more red butt splice. Same process, make sure the wire is seated firmly in the connector and crimp it down. Good one. Okay. So because I'm using a butt connector and I want to control the length of the wire, I cut off all of this. Now, with the old connector removed, we'll put the new connector back in where the old one was. It slides in. Pretty good design, I think, made to fit. And when it gets bottomed out, it's fairly well seated. Now, we have to run the wires through the plate. Otherwise, once we get them on, we couldn't run them through that hole. Now I'm going to prep two of these wires, the Green one needs to be stripped. The black one needs to be stripped. Maybe a little more there. I'm going to put my crimper into place on the red wire, and I'm going to slide the stripped end of the green wire up in the connector, make my crimp. So now I have a good connection between the red wire and the green wire. Now, to put these connectors on, you need a pair of pliers. These are just some ordinary slip joint pliers, and I've slipped the joint so that I do have a little gap there, and that'll make it a little easier to crimp the connector. Alright, so I straighten this out, make a nice spot for my loop wire. Then I take my butt wire and put it up into the connector, making sure it's properly seated. Take my pliers and I push that metal connector down. It pierces the insulation on both the loop wire and the connector wire. Makes a good electrical connection and a good mechanical connection, and then all I have to do is snap my cover into place to keep it from coming unfastened. And that is finished. Now, what do you think? Does my job look better than the way it was before? I think so, and I know it'll work a lot better. As you can see, all we lack now is finishing up. Our wire connections look good. They don't have to be waterproof because we're going to stuff all the connections back up between the outer wall and the inner wall of the trailer. The housing of the light fixture is sealed well along the top and sides. It's open at the bottom to allow some weeping, but practically no water gets down in here except what little condenses on the inside of the container, and that's not much. We put our plate back on in the same way we took it off. Top screws are the short screws, bottom screws are the long screws. As we tighten these screws up, we want to be careful because the holes are in the outer wall. The holes are in the outer wall of the trailer, and that's only made of pressed wood, or what we used to call chipboard. It's not very strong, and it would be really easy to strip those screws out. So we're just going to snug them up. Not going to overdo the tightening process. And that's good. Next step, put in the light bulb. As you can see, I put my nitrile glove back on because I don't want to contaminate the bulb with oil from my fingers. And as I insert the bulb, I want to try to put most of the pressure on the housing of the bulb and not much on the glass part. It's a little bit stiff to put in, but not bad. Get it started, wiggle it a little bit, and it seats pretty well. Looks like that's in there just fine. And the very last thing we have to do, put our cover back in place. And there it is, snapped in securely on both sides. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe even learned something. If so, please like and subscribe. I need all the subscribers I can get. Oh, and don't forget, I'm not Chuck.